The city's train station was bustling with activity, filled with commuters hurrying through turnstiles and announcements echoing overhead. Amid the crowd, Jordan Mensah, a 17-year-old dressed neatly in a crisp blazer and carrying a leather backpack, walked calmly toward the platform. Jordan had just finished a morning visit to the consulate where his father worked as an ambassador. He planned to meet a friend across town before heading back to the diplomatic residence. Despite his youth, his posture carried quiet confidence, the kind that came from being raised in an environment of protocol and respect. But to Officer Blake, who was patrolling the station, Jordan looked suspicious. The officer narrowed his eyes as he watched the teenager check his phone, unaware he was being watched. Blake approached quickly, his tone sharp from the start. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" Jordan froze, looking up politely. "Yes, officer? Is there a problem?" Blake folded his arms. "Yeah, there's a problem. You've been hanging around here, looking nervous. What are you doing?" Jordan blinked, confused. "I'm waiting for the next train. That's all." Blake smirked. "Sure you are. Let's see some ID." Jordan hesitated. "May I ask why? I haven't done anything." Blake stepped closer, his voice rising. "Don't play smart with me. I asked for ID. Hand it over now." Nearby commuters slowed down, sensing tension. Jordan opened his wallet slowly, offering his standard student card. Blake glanced at it and scoffed. "A student ID? That's cute. What else you got? You carrying anything you shouldn't?" "No," Jordan said calmly. "I'm just trying to get to my friend's place." Blake's tone turned harsher. "Empty your bag, now." Jordan looked around nervously. People were starting to stare. "Officer, I don't understand. Why are you treating me like this?" "Because you look like you don't belong here," Blake snapped. Before Jordan could respond, Blake grabbed his wrist. "You're coming with me until we sort this out." Jordan tried to stay composed. "Please, you're making a mistake. Save it," Blake interrupted, pulling him toward the small security office near the platform. Inside the office, Blake dumped Jordan's backpack onto the table, rifling through it carelessly. But as he unzipped the inner pocket, his hand froze. There, in a sleek leather case, was a black diplomatic passport with gold lettering. Blake stared at it, confused. "What the?" Jordan spoke calmly, though his voice carried an edge now. "That's my diplomatic passport. My father is Ambassador Mensah. You just detained the son of a foreign diplomat." Blake's face paled instantly, and in that single moment, the power dynamic shifted completely. For a long, tense second, the room was silent. Officer Blake stared at the small black booklet lying open on the table. The gold-embossed letters clearly read, "Diplomatic Passport, Republic of Canberra." The photo inside showed Jordan, dressed formally in a suit, staring confidently into the camera. The stamps along the pages marked visits to multiple countries. Blake's grip on the bag loosened slightly. "What? What is this?" he muttered, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Jordan straightened his blazer and spoke in a calm, measured voice. "That is a diplomatic passport. It grants me immunity under the Vienna Convention. You have no legal right to detain or search me without notifying the consulate. You're violating international law right now." Blake blinked rapidly, his earlier bravado starting to crack. I was just doing a routine check. You looked, suspicious." Jordan raised an eyebrow, his voice still even, but carrying a quiet sharpness. Suspicious? For standing on a platform checking my phone? Or was it simply because of how I look? Blake opened his mouth, but couldn't find a response. His mind raced as he realized the gravity of what he'd just done. Detaining a diplomat's family member wasn't just a mistake. It was a potential international incident. Before Blake could fumble for an excuse, the door to the security office swung open. A senior transit supervisor stepped in, holding a clipboard. He froze when he saw the scene. "What's going on here?" the supervisor demanded. Blake stammered, This young man was acting suspiciously, so I—" Jordan calmly interjected. "This officer detained me without cause, searched my belongings, and was about to arrest me. He didn't know I'm the son of Ambassador Mensah." The supervisor's face went pale. He looked from Jordan to the open diplomatic passport and back to Blake. "Blake, do you have any idea what you've done?" The supervisor said slowly. I didn't know who he was," Blake mumbled. "That's exactly the problem," the supervisor snapped. "This isn't just some random traveler. This is the son of a sitting ambassador. Do you realize the kind of trouble this could cause for the department, for the city?" Jordan folded his arms calmly. "My father will be informed of this. The consulate will be notified as well. I suggest you call your superior before this escalates further." The supervisor immediately pulled out his phone, dialing frantically. "I'm contacting the chief now." Blake stepped back, suddenly looking much smaller than before. His mind flashed through the implications: press coverage, disciplinary action, maybe even suspension. Jordan picked up his diplomatic passport from the table, dusting it off with quiet dignity. "You should be aware," he said evenly, "that diplomatic families have direct lines to state officials. This won't be brushed aside as just a misunderstanding." The supervisor swallowed hard. "Mr. Mensah, please accept my sincerest apologies. We'll resolve this immediately. This officer will be removed from duty while an investigation is conducted." Jordan looked at him with calm but piercing eyes. "You're apologizing because of who my father is. But what if I were just another teenager without a diplomatic title? Would anyone care?" The question lingered in the room like a weight neither man could lift. Just then, the supervisor's phone rang back. It was the chief of security. Jordan could hear the urgency in the supervisor's voice as he explained the situation. Words like diplomatic immunity and potential incident cut through the tense air. Within minutes, the chief himself rushed into the office. He was a tall, composed man with a deep frown. He walked directly to Jordan. "Mr. Mensah, I cannot express how sorry we are. This should never have happened. Please, allow us to escort you wherever you need to go." Jordan nodded slightly, sliding his passport back into his bag. "I'll be leaving now, but my father will be expecting a formal report of this incident. I suggest you prepare it carefully." The chief turned to Blake with a glare. "You're done here for today. Hand in your badge and wait for further notice." Blake's face turned pale as he realized the full consequence of his arrogance. Jordan walked out of the office with quiet composure, the crowd outside now whispering, realizing something significant had happened. The power dynamic had shifted completely. No raised voice, no outburst, just the quiet weight of truth. And as the young diplomat left the station, Blake was left standing in the office, realizing that his actions had just exposed everything wrong with how he saw the world. Jordan stepped back into the bustling station, his calm expression never breaking. The whispers followed him as he walked toward the platform. Travelers who had seen the confrontation exchanged glances, some shaking their heads at what they had witnessed. The transit supervisor hurried alongside him. "Mr. Mensah, please, allow us to escort you safely to your destination. We deeply regret what happened." Jordan stopped and turned to him, his gaze steady but polite. "I don't need an escort. What I need is for this not to happen to anyone else. Apologies, after the fact, don't undo humiliation." The supervisor swallowed hard, knowing there was nothing he could say to fix it in that moment. Meanwhile, back in the security office, Blake sat slumped in a chair as the chief of security filled out an incident report. The weight of what had just unfolded was finally settling in. "You don't get it, do you?" the chief said sharply. "This isn't just about stopping the wrong person. This is about international relations. That boy isn't just anyone. He's a diplomat's son. This could have blown up into a serious diplomatic complaint." Blake muttered quietly, "I thought I was just being thorough." The chief slammed the pen down. "No, you were being biased, and it's going to cost you." Across town, Jordan texted his father as he waited for the next train. "Delayed, but on my way. Will explain everything when I'm home." Minutes later, a reply came back. "Security team here is already aware. Don't worry, son. We'll handle this properly." Back at the consulate, Ambassador Mensah was already on a call with the city's public safety director. His voice was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. "My son was unlawfully detained and searched without cause," he said. "I expect a full explanation and immediate corrective measures. This is not how we expect our family, or anyone, to be treated." Meanwhile, the chief escorted Blake out of the office. His tone clipped. "You're on leave pending review. Don't even think about coming back here until further notice." Blake handed over his badge with trembling hands. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said quietly. The chief shook his head. "Intent doesn't matter. Impact does. And you just made a mess for everyone to clean up." Later that evening, Jordan arrived at the diplomatic residence. The stately building stood behind guarded gates, a sharp contrast to the chaos of the train station. His father was waiting in the foyer. "Are you all right?" Ambassador Mensah asked, his deep voice calm but laced with concern. "Yes," Jordan said, setting his bag down. "I stayed calm, but I can't stop thinking. What if I didn't have that passport? What if I were just any other kid?" His father nodded solemnly. "That's exactly the problem. Power shouldn't be the only thing that protects you from prejudice. That's why we must address it, not just for us, but for everyone." Jordan exhaled slowly. "They looked at me and assumed I didn't belong. And when they realized who I was, everything changed." Ambassador Mensah placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "It always changes when they see status, but we will make sure they learn why it shouldn't take a title to earn respect." Meanwhile, Blake sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the wall. The quiet was suffocating. He replayed the moment he saw the passport, the ambassador's name, and the realization that he had crossed a line he could never step back from. For the first time, he felt the heavy truth. He hadn't just misjudged a teenager, he had exposed his own prejudice to the world. The next morning, the city's public safety department released an internal memo about the incident. It circulated quickly among airport staff, warning that unwarranted detentions of travelers, especially those holding diplomatic credentials, will not be tolerated. Though no names were mentioned, everyone knew who it referred to. At the consulate, Ambassador Mensah was already meeting with senior officials from the city. The conference room was formal and tense, with the ambassador seated calmly at the head of the table. "I'm not asking for special treatment for my son," he said evenly. "I'm asking for equal treatment for everyone. If Jordan hadn't had a diplomatic passport, this situation would have been far worse. How many others leave your stations humiliated every day simply because they don't carry the same protection?" The officials shifted uncomfortably. They couldn't argue with him. Meanwhile, Jordan sat quietly in his room at the residence, scrolling through social media. News outlets had already picked up the story. Some headlines were neutral. Diplomat's son detained in security mix-up, but others were more pointed. Teen wrongly detained at station. Passport reveals his true identity. Messages were flooding in from friends and classmates. "I can't believe they did that to you. Wow, guess that officer's in trouble now." This is why people don't trust authority. Jordan sighed. He didn't want the attention. He wanted the system to change, not just for him, but for the kids who couldn't flash a special passport to make it all stop. Back at the station, Blake had been formally suspended. He sat in a disciplinary hearing with his union representative, the chief of security, and the airport director. "You didn't follow protocol," the chief said bluntly. "There was no reasonable suspicion, no cause. You acted on bias, plain and simple." Blake's voice was low. "I thought I was being cautious. I've seen a lot of things in this job. I made a judgment call." The director cut him off. "And it was the wrong call. A call that nearly became an international complaint. You're lucky the ambassador hasn't demanded your immediate dismissal." Blake lowered his head. For the first time, he understood that his assumptions had consequences far beyond himself. Meanwhile, Jordan's father joined him later that day in the residence garden. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the manicured lawns. "You handled yourself well," Ambassador Mensah said quietly. Staying calm was the right choice. It gave them no excuse to escalate further. Jordan looked down at his hands. "But it shouldn't have happened at all. And I keep thinking, if it were someone else, someone without the same protections, they'd probably still be sitting in a holding room somewhere." His father nodded solemnly. "That's why we must push for change. Respect should never depend on status. It should be a given." Later that evening, the ambassador received a call from the city's mayor offering formal apologies and promising a review of all security training programs. Across the city, Blake sat alone in his dimly lit apartment. The quiet felt heavier than usual. He replayed the ambassador's words from the meeting and Jordan's calm gaze when he revealed the passport. For the first time in years, Blake wasn't sure if he even recognized the man he had become, the officer who had stopped seeing people as people. He stared at his reflection in the window and whispered to himself, "I have to do better." The following morning, headlines about the incident dominated the city's news cycle. "Diplomat's son wrongfully detained by officer at Central Station" ran across the front pages. Talk shows debated it endlessly, some framing it as a cautionary tale of racial bias, others as an embarrassing failure for the city's public safety department. At the consulate, Jordan watched snippets of the coverage. Each reporter repeated the same line. The situation was de-escalated only after the officer discovered the teen held a diplomatic passport. Jordan felt a knot in his stomach. "So if I didn't have that passport," he murmured, "I'd just be another kid with no voice." Ambassador Mensah entered the room quietly. "You're not wrong," he said. "This is why we must speak up, not for ourselves, but for those who can't." Meanwhile, at the station, the security chief gathered the entire team for an urgent meeting. Blake sat in the back, silent. "This incident is unacceptable," the chief said, his voice echoing through the room. "You will all undergo mandatory bias and sensitivity training. If you can't treat every traveler with respect, you don't belong here." The room was heavy with tension. Some officers shifted uneasily. Others glanced at Blake with a mix of pity and judgment. After the meeting, Blake walked out into the terminal, watching the endless stream of travelers. For the first time, he noticed the nervous glances from some passengers, especially those who looked like Jordan. He wondered how many times he had made them feel unwelcome without even realizing it. Across the city, Michael, Jordan's older cousin and a junior diplomat himself, called to check in. "You handled it well," he told Jordan. "You stayed calm, even though you didn't have to. That's strength." Jordan sighed. "It didn't feel like strength. It felt like I had no choice." Michael paused, then said, "Sometimes strength is exactly that. Choosing control when the world tries to strip it away. But remember, your calm also held up a mirror to him. He had to see himself." Later that afternoon, the city's mayor held a press conference. She stood before cameras with the police commissioner and the airport director at her side. "We deeply regret the treatment of Ambassador Mensah's son," the mayor said. "This was a failure of training and judgment. But let me be clear. Respect and dignity are not privileges. They are rights. This administration will ensure incidents like this do not happen again." Reporters fired off questions about disciplinary action. The mayor confirmed Blake's suspension and promised structural reforms. Meanwhile, Blake sat in a disciplinary review room, waiting for his final meeting with the commissioner. He stared at his hands, feeling a mix of shame and fear. The door opened, and the commissioner entered, expression stern. "Do you understand the scale of what you caused?" Blake nodded silently. "Yes, sir. I let my bias speak before my brain." The commissioner exhaled. "It's not just about losing your temper. It's about losing sight of humanity. You have one chance to learn from this, or you're done." Across town, Jordan finally left the consulate to meet a friend. As he stepped onto the quiet street, a few people recognized him from the news and offered sympathetic looks. One elderly man stopped him gently. "Young man, you handled yourself with grace. That's how real change begins." Jordan managed a small smile. "Thank you, sir." As he walked on, he thought about how a single moment at a train station had rippled through the entire city, forcing some to reflect, some to reform, and some to finally see the truth. Because even one wrong assumption can reveal everything hidden beneath the surface. The following day, the consulate received an official letter from the mayor's office. It contained a formal apology for the incident and outlined new policies the city would implement. Mandatory training for all officers, a revised protocol for interactions with diplomats and their families, and a public statement reinforcing the city's commitment to fair treatment. Ambassador Mensah read the letter quietly, then set it down on his polished desk. "It's a start," he said to his aide, "but it cannot stop at words on paper. It has to change the way people think." Meanwhile, Jordan sat in the consulate library, flipping through his textbooks, but unable to focus. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages. Friends sending support, classmates debating the incident. He felt strange reading it all. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He wanted understanding. Later, Michael, his older cousin, visited again. You've become the center of a conversation bigger than you, he said gently. People are finally talking about what so many go through every day. Jordan sighed. But it shouldn't take a diplomatic passport for people to care. That's what bothers me most. If I wasn't protected by my father's title, no one would even know my name. Michael nodded slowly. And that's why you can use this moment. Not to get revenge, but to make sure it means something for everyone else who doesn't have that privilege. At the airport, Daniels arrived early for his mandatory training session. He sat in the back of the room as an instructor spoke. Bias is more than open hatred, the instructor said. It's the quiet judgment that shapes your behavior without you even realizing it. And for the person on the other end, it can be humiliating, even dangerous. Daniel stared at the floor. The words felt like they were directed solely at him. After the session, he approached the instructor quietly. I made a serious mistake. I detained someone who didn't deserve it. And when I realized who he really was, it showed me how wrong I'd been all along. How do I change? The instructor looked at him thoughtfully. Change isn't a single apology. It's choosing, every day, to see people as individuals. It's doing the work, even when no one's watching. Back at the consulate, Ambassador Mensah held a press briefing. Journalists crowded the room as cameras clicked. My family accepts the city's apology, he said calmly. But let me be clear. This is not just about my son. This is about every young person who has been treated as if they don't belong. Change must reach beyond this building and into every corner of this city. The reporters nodded, taking notes furiously. Meanwhile, Jordan quietly watched from a distance. Seeing his father handle the situation with composure reminded him that dignity was its own form of power. Later that evening, Daniels walked out of the airport after his shift. He paused on the sidewalk, watching the endless stream of travelers passing by. Each one had a story, a purpose, a life beyond what he could see. For the first time, he truly understood that his uniform didn't give him the right to decide who belonged. It gave him the responsibility to protect everyone equally. Across the city, Jordan sat on the balcony of the consulate, looking at the night sky. The city lights glimmered below, but his thoughts were on the quiet power of truth. One moment of injustice had forced many to look inward. It had sparked apologies, reforms, and, perhaps, the beginnings of real change, because even the smallest act of dignity can echo louder than 1,000 excuses. The next morning, the story still dominated the news. Headlines read, City implements reform after diplomat's son detained, and From mistake to movement, how one incident sparked change. Talk shows debated the deeper issues of bias and systemic prejudice. At the consulate, Jordan watched a segment on TV. A panel of experts discussed how quickly perceptions change when someone carries status or power. One question remains, a journalist said. Would this young man have been treated the same if he hadn't had a diplomatic passport? Or would he still be sitting in a holding cell, forgotten? Jordan turned off the television. That single question echoed exactly what he'd been feeling since the incident. Meanwhile, at the airport, Daniels began his shift quietly. The atmosphere felt different now. Colleagues spoke more carefully, aware that their behavior was being watched more closely than ever. A mother with 2 children approached the security lane, clearly flustered. Daniels stepped forward, offering a calm smile. Let me help you, ma'am. Take your time. She looked surprised, but grateful. Thank you. That's kind of you. It was such a small thing, but for Daniels, it was part of the slow rebuilding of who he wanted to be. Across town, Ambassador Mensah was invited to speak at a civic forum on equity and respect in public institutions. The hall was filled with community leaders, officials, and everyday citizens curious to hear his perspective. He stood at the podium, his tone calm but firm. "This is not just about my son. It is about every young man or woman who has been made to feel out of place simply because of how they look. Respect cannot be selective. It must be universal. That is the only way forward." The audience erupted in applause, many nodding in agreement. Later that day, Jordan received a message from a student he barely knew at his school. "I saw what happened to you on the news. It happens to me all the time, but no one notices. Thank you for speaking up, even if you didn't want to." Jordan stared at the message for a while, realizing that his experience had unintentionally given voice to countless others who didn't have the same platform. Meanwhile, Daniels attended another follow-up training session at the airport. The instructor asked officers to reflect on a time they had judged someone unfairly. When it was Daniels' turn, he spoke quietly. "I detained someone for no reason other than my assumptions. I didn't see the person. I saw a stereotype. And when I realized who he was, it was like a mirror I didn't want to look into. I don't ever want to be that man again." Back at the consulate, Jordan sat in the garden with his father. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees as they talked. "You handled yourself with more grace than most adults would have," Ambassador Mensah said softly. That composure forced them to see their mistake clearly. Jordan shrugged lightly. "It didn't feel like grace. It felt like I didn't have a choice. But if it helped someone else, then maybe it was worth it." His father smiled. "Sometimes the things we don't choose become the moments that teach the world the most." Later that night, Daniels left the airport and paused outside. Another one of Jordan's father's diplomatic cars passed through the terminal gates, its flag glinting in the light. Daniels watched silently, thinking of the boy who had exposed not just his mistake, but his entire way of seeing people. And across the city, Jordan sat by his window, looking at the lights in the distance. He realized that while the experience had been painful, it was also proof of something powerful. How one quiet act of dignity can echo far beyond the moment it happens. The following morning, the consulate released an official statement. It was brief but impactful. "We accept the city's apology, but we urge deeper systemic change to ensure that no one, diplomatic or not, is treated as less than they are." The statement spread quickly across social media. Many praised the calm, dignified response, while others debated the deeper issues it exposed. At school, Jordan arrived quietly, but the atmosphere was different. Classmates who normally didn't speak to him now looked at him with newfound respect. A few approached him cautiously. "Hey, Jordan," one student said. "I saw the news. That was crazy. I don't know how you stayed so calm." Jordan gave a faint smile. "Sometimes you don't have a choice. You either stay calm or they find another excuse to make it worse." Meanwhile, at the airport, Daniels began his shift under stricter supervision. He now had a routine he never followed before: looking passengers in the eye, greeting them respectfully, and keeping his tone neutral. It felt unnatural at first, but with each interaction, he realized how much easier it was to simply treat people as they deserved. A middle-aged man in simple clothes approached the checkpoint, Daniels noticed the man's hesitant body language, but ignored the old instinct to question it harshly. "Good morning, sir," Daniels said calmly. "May I see your ticket?" The man handed it over, and Daniels smiled slightly. "You're all set. Have a good flight." The man nodded, visibly relieved. Daniels felt a small sense of redemption, tiny but real. Across town, Ambassador Mensah attended a private meeting with city officials. They discussed long-term reforms, including updated training and community engagement initiatives. "This cannot be a one-time apology," the ambassador said firmly. "It has to be part of a larger effort. My son will be fine because of who I am. But what about the thousands of other young men who don't have a title to protect them?" The officials nodded, uncomfortable but understanding. Later that afternoon, Jordan met his cousin Michael at a cafe. Michael listened as Jordan explained how strange it felt to be at the center of so much attention. "You didn't ask for this," Michael said, "but it's bigger than you now. You handled it the way our family always has, with dignity. That's why it matters." Jordan stirred his drink quietly. "It just makes me wonder how many kids this happens to every day who don't have the chance to prove who they really are." Michael nodded. "Exactly. And maybe now, someone will think twice before treating them the same way." Back at the airport, Daniel stayed late after his shift to read through the new training materials. He didn't have to, but he wanted to. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his responsibility, not just as an officer, but as a human being. That evening, Jordan returned to the consulate. He sat in the garden, under the soft glow of the lights, listening to the city hum around him. His father joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Do you feel any different now?" Ambassador Mensah asked. Jordan thought for a moment. "A little. I feel stronger. But I also feel like there's so much more that needs to change." His father smiled gently. "And that, my son, is why people like you must keep carrying themselves with the strength they tried to deny you. Because one calm moment can force a lifetime of reflection in someone else." Meanwhile, Daniels left the terminal and looked up at the night sky. For the first time, he understood that the boy he had underestimated had given him the greatest lesson of his career. Because dignity, once revealed, has a way of changing even the hardest hearts. The next day, Jordan accompanied his father to a diplomatic luncheon hosted at the mayor's office. The event brought together city leaders, diplomats, and community advocates to discuss building stronger cultural understanding. As they arrived, the mayor greeted them personally. "Ambassador Mensah." "Jordan," she said, with a respectful nod. "Thank you for coming. I want you both to know this city is committed to ensuring what happened will not be repeated." Ambassador Mensah's tone was polite but steady. "Words are only the beginning. I will be watching to see what actions follow." Jordan stayed quiet, observing the room filled with important faces and polite smiles. He wondered how many of these people truly understood the weight of being misjudged before you even speak. Meanwhile, at the airport, Daniels was assigned to shadow a senior officer as part of his probationary period. The senior officer, Martinez, had a calm, empathetic approach with travelers, something Daniels had never really paid attention to before. "Notice how you greet them," Martinez explained. "Your tone sets the entire interaction. Treat people like they matter and 9 times out of 10, they respond the same way. Daniels nodded, slowly absorbing the lesson. Back at the luncheon, the mayor invited Jordan to share his perspective. The room quieted as he stood, hesitant at first, but then his voice grew stronger. "I didn't want attention from what happened," Jordan began, "but it made me realize how many people don't get to walk away like I did. If I didn't have a diplomatic passport, I might still be sitting in a holding room. That shouldn't be the reality for anyone." The room fell silent. Even the seasoned officials looked thoughtful. Across the city, Daniels finished his shift and sat in the break room, thinking back on the faces of the travelers he had interacted with that day. They were just people, families, workers, students, trying to get somewhere, trying to live their lives. For the first time, he saw them as more than potential threats. Later in the afternoon, Ambassador Mensah and Jordan returned to the consulate. As they walked through the garden, Jordan asked quietly, "Do you think anything will really change?" His father looked at him with calm certainty. "Change is slow, but it begins with uncomfortable truths. You force them to face one. That's how it starts." That evening, Daniels attended another mandatory workshop on implicit bias. The instructor played real stories from travelers who had been profiled. Hearing their pain made him feel the weight of his own actions more deeply. When the session ended, Daniels lingered behind. "How do you move forward when you realize you've been part of the problem?" he asked quietly. The instructor replied, "You move forward by owning it. You can't undo the past, but you can decide how you show up every single day from now on." Meanwhile, Jordan sat in his room, scrolling through messages from students he didn't even know. "Thank you for speaking up," one said. "What happened to you happens to kids like us every day. Maybe now they'll listen." Jordan set his phone down and stared out at the city lights. He realized that his calm silence in that station had spoken louder than he ever expected. And across the city, Daniels walked home under the same lights, finally beginning to see that what he thought was just routine work had been shaping lives in ways he'd never considered. Sometimes it takes one humbling moment to open a door to real understanding. The following morning, the city issued a formal press release about new reforms in public security protocols. It outlined mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all officers, stricter guidelines for detentions, and a community oversight board to monitor interactions at transportation hubs. At the consulate, Ambassador Mensah read the statement carefully. He handed it to Jordan, who scanned the document silently. "It's a start," his father said calmly. "Small steps, but steps nonetheless." Jordan nodded, but looked uncertain. "It shouldn't have taken what happened to me for them to act. How many others were ignored before this?" Ambassador Mensah placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Change often begins with one story that forces people to look closer. You can't undo the past, but you can shape what comes next." Meanwhile, at the airport, Daniel started his shift with a different attitude. He was more deliberate in his actions now, his voice softer and his posture less rigid. As a young man, carrying a battered suitcase, approached nervously, Daniel smiled and said, "Morning. Headed somewhere special?" The traveler blinked, surprised by the kind Just going home to see family." Daniels checked his ticket and waved him through with a genuine, "Safe travels." It was such a small moment, but it felt like progress. Across town, Jordan visited a community center with his cousin Michael. They met with local youth groups to talk about what had happened. The kids listened intently, some wide-eyed, others nodding, as if they understood far too well. One boy raised his hand. "What did it feel like when the officer grabbed you?" Jordan paused. "It felt like I didn't matter, like he saw me as a problem before I even said a word. But staying calm forced him to face what he'd done. Anger wouldn't have changed him. Composure did." The room was silent as the kids absorbed his words. Later that day, Daniels was called into the director's office for a follow-up. "I've been watching your interactions," she said. "There's been a noticeable change. Passengers have even left positive feedback with your name on it. Keep it up, Daniels. This is the officer you should have been all along." Daniels nodded slowly. "I understand now. I used to see uniforms and procedures, not people. But I can't go back to that." Meanwhile, Ambassador Mensah attended a diplomatic reception that evening. Officials and community leaders approached him, thanking him for handling the incident with dignity instead of outrage. "You showed restraint when it could have turned into a political nightmare," one official said. Ambassador Mensah replied calmly, "Dignity is the loudest response to injustice. It forces everyone to see the truth more clearly than anger ever could." Back at the consulate, Jordan sat in his room, looking at the messages still flooding his phone. People from around the world were reaching out, some to apologize for similar treatment they'd faced, others to thank him for shedding light on the issue. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who'd simply survived an experience too common to ignore. Across the city, Daniels walked out of the airport after his shift. As he stood in the cool evening air, he watched a plane ascend into the sky. He didn't see just a flight this time. He saw possibility, resilience, and the quiet strength of a boy who had every reason to lash out, but chose instead to stand tall. Sometimes, it only takes one calm voice to break the loudest silence. The next day, Jordan was invited to speak briefly at a youth leadership forum hosted at the city library. Students from different schools gathered to hear stories of resilience and hope. When it was his turn, Jordan stepped onto the small stage. He hesitated for a moment, scanning the faces in the audience. Some looked curious. Others looked like they already understood what he was about to say. "I never expected my name to be in the news," Jordan began quietly. "I was just a kid waiting for a train. But in that moment, someone saw me as something I wasn't. They didn't see a student or a son or a friend. They saw suspicion." The room was silent. "I stayed calm," he continued, "not because I wasn't angry, but because I knew losing my calm wouldn't change his mind. It would only give him another excuse. What I learned that day is this: sometimes the most powerful response is to keep your dignity, even when someone tries to take it from you." The students nodded, some clapping softly. Meanwhile, at the airport, Daniels began another day with a renewed sense of purpose. A young couple approached the security lane, juggling luggage and a crying baby. Instead of rushing them like he might have in the past, Daniels smiled and said, "Take your time. I'll help you with this." The couple thanked him, visibly relieved. Daniels realized small gestures like this didn't just help the passengers. They were slowly reshaping how he saw himself in the role. Back at the library, a young girl raised her hand and asked Jordan, "Were you scared?" Jordan paused. "A little, but more than scared, I felt invisible, like nothing I said would matter. But the truth is, Staying calm made me seen in a way I didn't expect. After the forum ended, several students came up to thank him personally. One boy whispered, "That happens to me all the time. It helps to know I'm not alone." Later that afternoon, Ambassador Mensah met with the mayor again to discuss the reforms being rolled out. "We will hold you accountable for these promises," the ambassador said calmly. "This cannot be a temporary fix for the cameras. It has to be lasting change." The mayor nodded earnestly. "It will be. You have my word." Meanwhile, Daniels was called into the director's office for another check-in. "You're showing progress," the director said. "Passengers are noticing. I hope you understand, this isn't just about saving your job. It's about becoming the kind of officer who honors the badge you wear." Daniels nodded. "I know. I'm not the same man I was before. I can't undo what I did, but I can choose differently now." That evening, Jordan returned home to the consulate. He sat with his father in the quiet garden. "Do you regret staying calm?" Ambassador Mensah asked softly. Jordan shook his head. "No, because it wasn't just about me. It showed everyone else exactly what needed to be seen." Across the city, Daniels finished his shift and stepped outside. He looked up at the night sky, planes moving silently above. He thought of Jordan's calm face in that security office, and for the first time, he felt genuine respect, not just for Jordan, but for the lesson he had unwillingly taught him. Because dignity has a way of leaving echoes long after the moment has passed. The following morning, the City Council held a public hearing to discuss the proposed reforms for security training and oversight. Journalists filled the chamber, cameras rolling as officials detailed new procedures. Among the invited speakers was Ambassador Mensah, who arrived with Jordan quietly by his side. When it was his turn to speak, the ambassador stood at the podium with calm authority. "My son is not the only one who has been treated as if he does not belong," he said. "He simply carries a name and a passport that forced this issue into the light. But what about the countless others who are dismissed, humiliated, or worse, forgotten, because they cannot demand accountability? This is your chance to ensure dignity is a right, not a privilege." The room was silent, the weight of his words undeniable. Meanwhile, at the airport, Daniels went about his shift carefully. A teenage boy approached the checkpoint, looking anxious. Daniels remembered Jordan instantly, his posture, his calm voice, and felt a pang of guilt. "Hey there," Daniels said gently. "No rush. You're fine. Just show me your ticket when you're ready." The boy relaxed, handing over the ticket. Daniels nodded and waved him through. It was another small moment, but it was one more step toward undoing years of thoughtless behavior. Back at the city hearing, council members asked Jordan to share his perspective. At first, he hesitated, but then he stepped forward, his voice steady despite the rows of officials staring back at him. "I didn't ask to be here," Jordan said softly. "I just wanted to take the train. But what happened to me made me realize how easy it is for someone to lose their dignity in a single moment. I was lucky. I had a passport that made people listen. But not everyone does. That's why this matters. You have the power to change how people are treated before it's too late." Murmurs of agreement filled the chamber. Later that afternoon, Daniels was summoned again by the airport director. "You'll remain on probation," she told him, "but I'm seeing progress." Keep proving that you understand what this job is really about. Not power, responsibility. Daniels nodded quietly. I do, and I'll keep proving it. Across town, Jordan and his father returned to the consulate after the hearing. Jordan sat in his room, scrolling through messages from strangers who had watched the live stream. Thank you for speaking for all of us who never got the chance. Your calm gave me hope that things can change. He put his phone down and stared out the window, feeling the strange mix of pride and sadness that came with being the center of such a conversation. Meanwhile, Daniels left the airport after his shift. He paused outside the terminal, watching as passengers laughed and hugged their families. He realized for the first time how much trust people placed in officers like him, and how easily that trust could be broken. That evening, Ambassador Mensah joined Jordan on the balcony at the residence. The city lights stretched out before them like stars. You've done more than you realize, the ambassador said gently. You've turned a moment of injustice into a lesson for an entire city. Jordan shook his head. It still doesn't feel like enough. His father smiled faintly. It's a beginning, and beginnings are how change is born. Somewhere under the same city lights, Daniels walked home in silence, knowing he would never see his badge or the people he served the same way again. Because sometimes, one moment forces you to see what you'd ignored all along. The following morning, the local newspaper ran an editorial titled "Dignity Without Status: Why Reform Must Go Beyond Diplomatic Titles." It highlighted Jordan's story, but focused on the countless unnamed people who didn't have a passport or position to shield them from injustice. At the consulate, Ambassador Mensah read the article over breakfast. He nodded thoughtfully, then handed it to Jordan. This, he said softly, is why your composure mattered. It's making people think beyond just what happened to you. Jordan scanned the editorial, feeling a mix of emotions. He hadn't wanted the spotlight, but now it was clear the incident was sparking a larger conversation. Meanwhile, at the airport, Daniels began his shift under the watchful eye of his supervisor. He greeted passengers politely, his tone measured. A businessman in casual clothes approached the security line, and for a fleeting moment, Daniels' old instincts stirred, the quiet bias he once acted on without thought. But he stopped himself. Instead, he said calmly, "Good morning, sir. Ticket and ID, please." The man smiled faintly and handed them over. Daniels checked them carefully and returned them without issue. It was such a simple exchange, yet it felt like a personal victory. Across the city, Jordan met with a youth advocacy group at the community center. Dozens of teenagers sat in a circle, listening intently as he shared his experience. It wasn't just about being detained, Jordan told them. It was about the message it sent, that I didn't belong there. And the hardest part wasn't being scared. It was feeling invisible, like nothing I said mattered until they saw my last name in my passport. A girl in the group raised her hand. So what do you do when you don't have a title to make them listen? Jordan paused, then said, "You keep speaking anyway. You keep carrying yourself with the dignity they try to take from you, and you find allies who will stand with you." The room was quiet. Some nodded. Others looked down, deep in thought. Meanwhile, Daniels was pulled aside by Officer Martinez, the senior officer he'd been shadowing. "I can see you're trying," Martinez said. "But remember, real change doesn't happen overnight. It's in the way you handle every interaction, even when no one's watching. That's the work." Daniels nodded. "I know. I can't undo what I did to that kid, but I don't want to be that officer again. Later that afternoon, Ambassador Mensah attended another meeting with city officials. He pushed for broader training programs and accountability measures. "This is not just about my son," he repeated. "This is about trust. Trust between the public and those meant to protect them. You don't earn trust with apologies. You earn it with change." That evening, Jordan returned to the consulate and sat in the quiet garden. He checked his phone and saw new messages from people he didn't even know: students, parents, even teachers, thanking him for being a voice for something bigger. Across the city, Daniels left the terminal and paused on the steps outside. He looked up at the night sky, watching a plane's lights blink as it ascended. He thought of Jordan again, his calm voice, his steady gaze, and how it had unraveled years of unexamined prejudice in a single moment. For the first time in his career, Daniels truly understood the responsibility of his badge, because real authority isn't in who you stop. It's in how you treat the ones you're supposed to protect. The next day, the city hosted a roundtable discussion on public safety and community trust. It was broadcast live, with local leaders, activists, and members of law enforcement seated together. Among the invited speakers were Ambassador Mensah and, surprisingly, Officer Daniels. Jordan watched the live stream from the consulate, curious. Ambassador Mensah spoke first, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of truth. "This incident is not isolated. It is a symptom of something larger. My son's diplomatic passport revealed the truth of who he was. But what about those who don't have such protection? Will they continue to be treated as less until they can prove their worth?" The audience nodded, murmuring in agreement. Then Daniels was called to speak. He stepped up to the microphone slowly, his posture stiff. "I detained Jordan Mensah that day," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "I acted on an assumption I didn't even question. I didn't see a young man. I saw what I wanted to see, and I was wrong. I've had to face that every day since. I can't erase what I did, but I can promise to be better. And I hope this city will hold all of us accountable to do the same." There was a pause. Some in the audience frowned, skeptical, but others gave a small nod, recognizing at least the beginning of accountability. Meanwhile, Jordan's cousin Michael joined him in the consulate lounge. "See that? Even the officer is admitting it publicly. That doesn't happen often." Jordan shrugged slightly. "Admitting it doesn't fix it, but maybe it's a step." Back at the round table, the moderator asked the mayor what the city planned to do next. "We're implementing community liaisons at all major transit hubs," the mayor announced. "There will also be ongoing training programs and an independent board to review complaints. We can't change the past, but we can build a better future." Later that afternoon, Daniels returned to the airport for his shift. A young black man with dreadlocks walked up to the checkpoint. Daniels felt that old instinct rise for a split second, but he stopped it immediately. "Good afternoon," Daniels said with a calm smile. "May I see your boarding pass?" The traveler handed it over, and Daniels checked it, handing it back with a polite nod. "Safe travels, sir." The man smiled back. "Thanks, officer." Daniels realized how easy it was to make someone feel respected when you actually chose to see them as a person. Back at the consulate, Ambassador Mensah returned from the round table. He joined Jordan in the garden. "You saw the officer's statement?" he asked. "Yes," Jordan said quietly. "Do you think he meant it?" His father nodded slowly. "I believe he's beginning to. Sometimes it takes being humbled to open your eyes." He'll carry that moment with him forever. That evening, Daniel sat in his small apartment after his shift, replaying his own words from the round table. He thought of Jordan's calm face in the security office and realized that, in a strange way, the boy had given him a chance to change. Across the city, Jordan looked out of his window at the skyline, reflecting on how one painful moment had sparked so many ripples, conversations, reforms, and even the beginning of someone else's redemption. Because sometimes a single quiet act of dignity can echo louder than 1,000 protests. The following morning, news outlets replayed clips from the roundtable discussion. Social media was flooded with comments. Some praised Ambassador Mensah for his calm yet powerful words, while others were surprised that Officer Daniels had admitted his mistake so openly. At the consulate, Jordan scrolled through the headlines. Ambassador calls for lasting change. Officer apologizes publicly for wrongful detention. And city promises new public safety reforms. Michael, his cousin, leaned against the doorway. It's strange, isn't it? Seeing your life turned into a public debate? Jordan sighed. Yeah, people talk about it like it's a story. But for me, it was just a moment that shouldn't have happened. Meanwhile, Daniels arrived at the airport for his shift. He was quieter now, more deliberate in every movement. Officer Martinez, the senior officer he'd been shadowing, noticed the change. You're different these days, Martinez said as they walked the terminal together. Daniels nodded. That kid, Jordan, he made me see myself, and I didn't like what I saw. Martinez gave a small nod of approval. Then keep changing. That's the real work. Later that day, Jordan visited a local high school to speak with students. He was hesitant at first, but the principal assured him the kids wanted to hear from someone close to their age who had faced what they feared daily. Standing in front of the classroom, Jordan spoke plainly. What happened to me at the train station wasn't special. It happens to people every day. The only difference was my passport made them stop. But no one should need a title or a connection to be treated like a human being. A boy in the back raised his hand. Weren't you mad? Like, really mad? Jordan paused. Yes, but I also knew getting angry would only give them more power. Staying calm made them face what they'd done without giving them an excuse to twist the story. Sometimes dignity is the loudest response you can give. The students listened intently, some nodding with quiet understanding. Back at the airport, Daniels assisted an elderly black woman with her luggage. She smiled warmly and said, "Thank you, officer. It's nice to meet someone who's patient." Daniels nodded. "You're welcome, ma'am." He felt a small but genuine sense of redemption. That evening, Ambassador Mensah hosted a small dinner at the consulate for community leaders. As they discussed ongoing reforms, he reminded them, this is not about one boy or one officer. It's about a system of assumptions we all have to dismantle. Later, after everyone left, he joined Jordan in the study. You're helping people without realizing it, he told his son. Your calm that day is reaching further than you think. Jordan looked down at his hands. I didn't plan to make a statement. I just wanted to get on a train. But if it makes life even a little easier for someone else, then maybe it was worth it. Across the city, Daniel sat in his modest apartment, staring at the small notebook where he'd started jotting down his thoughts after each shift. He wrote quietly, Today, I saw people, not profiles. I need to keep seeing them that way. And in two very different places, a teenager and an officer who had once been at odds were both shaping change in their own ways. One through quiet strength, the other through quiet reflection. Because even one encounter can change the course of two lives. The next day, Jordan woke up to find that an international news outlet had picked up the story. The headline read, "Teen Diplomat's Son Wrongfully Detained. Sparks Global Conversation on Bias and Power." It featured a photo of him leaving the consulate beside his father, the ambassador. He sighed, scrolling through the article. It quoted his short speech at the youth forum and highlighted his calm response as an act of quiet resistance. Jordan wasn't sure how he felt about being seen as a symbol. He was just a teenager who had wanted to catch a train. At breakfast, Ambassador Mensah noticed his son's expression. "Does it bother you?" he asked gently. Jordan nodded. "I didn't want all of this. I just wanted to be treated like anyone else." His father placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Sometimes the things we don't choose are the things that change the most. Meanwhile, Daniels began his morning at the airport terminal. He had been reassigned temporarily to a community outreach desk where passengers could ask questions. It felt strange being in a less authoritative role, but it also gave him a chance to interact with people differently. A little boy approached with his mother, clutching a toy airplane. Daniels knelt slightly and smiled. "Is that your favorite plane?" The boy grinned shyly. "Yeah, I want to be a pilot one day." Daniels chuckled softly. "You can be anything you want. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As the boy ran back to his mother, Daniels felt a faint flicker of hope that maybe, through small gestures, he could become someone better than he had been. Later that day, Jordan joined his cousin Michael at a community roundtable where local teens shared their stories about being profiled or judged unfairly. Some spoke quietly, others with frustration, but all their stories felt painfully familiar. One girl said, "It's like you're guilty of something before you even open your mouth." Jordan nodded. "That's exactly how I felt. Invisible until they saw my passport, and then suddenly I was important. But the truth is, nothing about me changed. Only their perception did." The room grew quiet with the weight of that truth. Back at the airport, Daniels finished his shift and stopped by the training room. He stayed late, reading through the case studies on bias and de-escalation. He didn't have to. No one was watching. But he wanted to understand the patterns that had led him to his own mistake. Meanwhile, Ambassador Mensah met with the mayor and the city's police commissioner. They finalized plans for a new cultural liaison program, which would place specially trained officers at major transit points to prevent incidents like Jordan's. "This is not just about policy," the ambassador reminded them. "It's about rebuilding trust. That starts with changing how people are seen." That evening, Jordan sat in the consulate garden, reflecting on everything that had unfolded since that day at the station. He thought about how one small, humiliating moment had turned into a city-wide reckoning, and even made a single officer reconsider how he saw the world. Across the city, Daniels left the terminal and looked up at the night sky. A plane passed overhead, its lights blinking steadily against the darkness. He thought of Jordan and the quiet strength he'd shown. It wasn't anger that had stayed with him. It was the calm, dignified way the boy had looked at him, forcing him to see himself clearly. And in that shared silence, even miles apart, both of them carried the same truth. Sometimes it takes just one moment of stillness to shatter years of noise. The following day, The consulate hosted a small gathering for youth leaders and community advocates. Jordan attended reluctantly, still unsure how to feel about the attention. As the event began, a young activist approached him. "You don't know me," she said, "but what you went through made people talk. It made people who usually ignore this stuff pay attention." Jordan gave a polite smile. "I'm glad if it helped, but I wish it didn't have to happen in the first place." Meanwhile, Daniels arrived at the airport earlier than usual. He wanted time to mentally prepare himself for another day of facing the public with a new mindset. As he walked through the terminal, he noticed things he'd never really seen before: the nervous glances of travelers, the quiet tension some carried. He wondered how many times he'd made that tension worse without even realizing it. During his shift, an older man with limited English struggled to communicate at the checkpoint. In the past, Daniels might have grown impatient, but this time he slowed his tone and used simple words, even gesturing gently to explain the process. The man smiled in gratitude. For Daniels, it was another reminder that small choices could either build fear or build trust. Later that afternoon, Ambassador Mensah and the mayor stood together at a press conference. Behind them were banners reading "Community Trust Initiative." "This is not about one incident," the mayor said. "It's about changing the culture of how we see and treat one another. We're implementing new training programs and creating community liaison teams to prevent bias from shaping interactions." Ambassador Mensah stepped forward. "Respect cannot be conditional. It should not depend on a uniform, a title, or a passport. It should be given freely because it is the foundation of true safety and trust." The crowd applauded, journalists snapping photos as the two leaders shook hands. Across town, Jordan sat with Michael at a quiet cafe. They talked about the press conference and the reforms. "Do you think it will actually work?" Michael asked. Jordan shrugged slightly. "I don't know. But even if it helps a little, even if it makes one officer stop and think before acting, it's worth it." Michael nodded. "You're stronger than you realize, you know. Not everyone could handle what you did with that much grace." Meanwhile, Daniels ended his shift and stayed behind in the break room. He pulled out the small notebook he had started carrying and wrote down his thoughts. "Today, I helped a man who didn't speak my language. I didn't see him as a problem. I saw him as someone who just needed help. It felt right. I'm starting to understand what I missed all these years." That evening, Jordan returned to the consulate and sat in the garden with his father. The city lights flickered in the distance. "Everything feels so different now," Jordan said quietly. "Like one moment changed the whole direction of so many lives." Ambassador Mensah nodded. "Because it did. A single moment can open eyes that were closed for years. And sometimes, that's how real change begins." Across the city, Daniel stood outside the airport, looking up at another plane climbing into the night sky. He thought of the boy he'd once humiliated and realized that Jordan's calm presence had left a mark on him deeper than any reprimand ever could. Because sometimes the person you try to diminish is the one who teaches you how to truly see. The following day, Jordan returned to school for the first time since the incident had made headlines. The hallways felt different, quieter, with students stealing glances as he passed. Some looked at him with admiration, others with curiosity, and a few with guilt, realizing they might have once made similar assumptions about him. During lunch, a small group of students gathered around his table. "Jordan, can I ask you something?" one of them said. "When that officer grabbed you, weren't you scared?" Jordan nodded slightly. "Yes, but I also knew getting angry wouldn't help. Staying calm was the only way I could keep control of the situation." Another student added softly, "I don't think I could have done what you did. I probably would have yelled or fought back." Jordan gave a faint smile. "Sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing. Just standing there with dignity can say more than shouting ever could." Meanwhile, at the airport, Daniel started his shift at the new community liaison desk. Passengers were curious about the change. Some stopped to ask questions, others simply nodded in approval. Daniels handed out brochures about traveler rights and explained new procedures to anyone who asked. It felt strange to him, being on the other side of the conversation, helping people understand instead of intimidating them. But it also felt right. Later that day, the mayor's office hosted a follow-up meeting with community leaders to discuss the early impact of the reforms. Ambassador Mensah was there, seated beside civil rights advocates and city officials. "The goal is not just to retrain officers," the mayor said. "It's to rebuild trust. That will take time, but we are committed to this path." Ambassador Mensah spoke next. "Trust is fragile. Once it's broken, it is hard to repair. But I believe small, consistent actions can begin to heal it. We must hold ourselves accountable every day, not just when the cameras are watching." The room nodded in quiet agreement. Meanwhile, Jordan's cousin Michael met him after school. "How was it?" Michael asked as they walked home. Jordan shrugged. "Different. People look at me like I'm someone important now. But I don't feel important. I just feel like I got lucky because of my passport. What about all the kids who don't have that?" Michael put a hand on his shoulder. "And that's why you're speaking up. You're giving a voice to those who can't." Back at the airport, Daniels helped an elderly traveler who had gotten lost in the terminal. He patiently walked her to her gate, making sure she was comfortable before leaving. As she thanked him with a smile, Daniels realized how much more fulfilling it was to help than to judge. That evening, Jordan and his father sat together on the consulate balcony. The sun was setting, painting the sky in warm hues. "Do you think this will last?" Jordan asked quietly. "All these changes, will they actually make a difference?" Ambassador Mensah looked out at the horizon. "Some changes fade, but the ones that truly matter take root in people's hearts. You planted a seed in that officer, in the city, in everyone who saw what happened. That's how lasting change begins. Quietly, one heart at a time." Across the city, Daniels walked out of the airport after his shift. He looked up at the same sunset, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Because one calm moment can ripple further than you'll ever know. The next day, Jordan received an unexpected invitation from the city council to attend a youth advisory meeting. They wanted his perspective on improving the relationship between public safety officers and the community. At first, he hesitated. "I'm just a kid," he told his father. "Why would they want my opinion?" Ambassador Mensah smiled gently. "Because your experience has already made people listen. Sometimes it takes someone outside the system to show it what it's missing." So later that afternoon, Jordan sat in a conference room surrounded by city leaders, educators, and community advocates. They asked him to speak freely. "I don't have all the answers," Jordan admitted, "but I know how it feels to be judged before you even speak. If you really want to change things, you have to start by making people feel seen. Not just their clothes, their skin, or where they're standing, but who they are." The room fell silent as his words lingered. One council member nodded thoughtfully. "It's easy to forget that behind every interaction is a human being. We need to train our officers to remember that." Meanwhile, at the airport, Daniels was assigned to help with a new traveler assistance booth. Passengers were directed to him for questions about flight connections, security policies, and traveler rights. A young boy approached nervously, holding a ticket. Sir, I'm lost. Can you help me find my gate?" Daniels knelt to the boy's level and smiled. "Of course. Let's look at your ticket together." As he guided the boy, Daniels realized how much his role could mean, how it could make someone's journey easier instead of harder. Later that day, the mayor held another press briefing. She announced that the first round of community liaison officers would begin training next month. Behind her stood the ambassador, several civil rights leaders, and even representatives from the airport security team. "This is not a quick fix," the mayor said firmly, "but it's a commitment. We will continue working with our communities to ensure that no one feels invisible in this city." Ambassador Mensah stepped forward briefly. "We must move beyond apologies to action. True respect cannot be conditional. It must be the standard." Back at the consulate, Jordan returned from the youth advisory meeting with a quiet sense of purpose. Michael, his cousin, met him at the door. "How was it?" Michael asked. Jordan exhaled. It felt strange, like they were really listening, but I just kept thinking about all the kids who don't have someone to speak for them. It shouldn't take a title to get that kind of attention. Michael nodded. "That's exactly why you were there. You're speaking for them now." Meanwhile, Daniels finished his shift and sat in the break room with Officer Martinez. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" Martinez said. Daniels nodded. "Yeah. I used to think authority was about control. Now I see it's about responsibility. I just wish I'd learned it before I hurt someone." Martinez looked at him surprised. "Seriously. The important thing is you're learning now. Keep going." That evening, Jordan and his father sat quietly on the consulate balcony, watching the city lights come alive. "Do you think they'll really change?" Jordan asked softly. His father's gaze was steady. "Some will. Not all, not immediately. But even one person seeing the truth differently is a victory. You've already started something, whether you realize it or not." Across the city, Daniels walked out of the airport, pausing to watch another plane take off into the night sky. He thought of Jordan again, the calm boy who had unknowingly changed him. Sometimes, the smallest acts of grace can echo in ways no one expects. A week later, the city hosted a public event at the Central Station, the very place where everything began. The mayor, city officials, community leaders, and members of the public gathered to unveil new measures aimed at rebuilding trust in public safety. Jordan stood quietly beside his father as the mayor spoke. "This station is a gateway for thousands of people every day," she said. "But for some, it was also a place of fear and humiliation. Today, we begin to change that." Behind her, banners displayed new initiatives: community liaison officers, updated training for all personnel, and a hotline for reporting misconduct. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Ambassador Mensah was invited to speak next. His voice was calm, but resonated deeply with the crowd. This is not about punishing one man. It's about challenging an entire way of thinking. No one should need a diplomatic title to be treated with basic respect. Let this be the moment we move beyond apologies to lasting change. The audience applauded, some wiping away quiet tears. Meanwhile, Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd in his plain clothes, not his uniform. He wasn't part of the ceremony, but he came anyway. Watching from a distance, he saw Jordan standing tall beside his father, calm as ever. Daniels felt a strange mix of regret and gratitude. Regret for the harm he caused, gratitude for the lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. After the speeches ended, a few reporters approached Jordan for comments. He spoke softly, but clearly. "I didn't want to become a symbol," Jordan said. "I just wanted to get on a train that day. But if what happened to me helps even one person be treated better, then maybe it was worth it. Respect shouldn't depend on who you are. It should be automatic." The reporters nodded, writing down every word. Later that afternoon, the ambassador and Jordan returned to the consulate. Michael met them at the entrance. "You did well," Michael said. "People listened today." Jordan gave a faint smile. "I hope they don't just listen. I hope they act." That evening, Daniels went to the station after his shift was done. He walked through the same hallway where he had first stopped Jordan. It looked the same, crowded, noisy, full of rushing passengers. But to Daniels, it felt entirely different now. He stood for a moment, watching the faces in the crowd. Each one was just a person, living their life, trying to get somewhere. No one deserved to be made to feel small for simply existing. Back at the consulate, Jordan sat on the balcony as the city lights shimmered below. His father joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "Do you feel different now?" Ambassador Mensah asked gently. Jordan nodded slowly. "I feel like I understand more about people, about power, about how one moment can show someone exactly who they are." His father smiled faintly. "And sometimes that one moment can show them who they could be." Across the city, Daniels left the station and looked up as a train rumbled overhead, its lights cutting through the darkness. He thought of the boy who had silently forced him to confront everything wrong with his own perspective. And for the first time, Daniels felt a quiet sense of hope that he could become the kind of officer who didn't just wear a badge, but honored it. 3 lives had intersected in one ordinary place. One with calm dignity, one with overdue humility, and one with the resolve to build a better path forward. Because sometimes it only takes one moment of stillness in the face of injustice to set change in motion.